Hello, TPS. We are going to be interviewing you for a series of questions that were sent by a journalist, and we want to get access to those questions. You are here in the middle of your trip, a 1 month trip to the US, and how's it been so far?
Well, it has been excellent. It's a pity that it's coming to an end very soon, but I have spent very valuable time with the family and also engaged in various activities which we all enjoy.
Excellent. I see you have your two computers. Why do you have two computers in front of you?
Well, one is my computer which I have been using, which I brought from India, and the other one is the latest
Apple Neo MacBook.
Apple Neo. No?
Neo MacBook, yeah, that's what it's called.
Apple
All right,
Neo.
great. So we have some questions here. What did you enjoy most as a diplomat?
Well, representing India abroad, particularly at the United Nations, and the travel and the company you get in various countries.
Any not so good aspects of working in the Foreign Service?
Well, it is a challenge in the sense that you move from country to country every 3 years. Sometimes very interesting countries, very developed countries, sometimes very developing countries where there are difficulties. But it all evens out at the end.
What is behind you, and why is it important that it be behind you in this photograph, in this filming?
Well, I spent about 20 years in the United Nations at different UN capitals. New York twice, then Vienna, then Nairobi. So UN has become part of my official life. I'm considered a multilateralist. We have bilateralists and multilateralists. And I have done more UN than most IFS officers.
And that's UN headquarters.
Yes.
What does it mean when you see that? How long have you been coming to the US? When did you first come? There's a hotel nearby that you've been used to going, UN Plaza. Talk about that a little bit.
Yes, I came here in 1979 for the first time, accompanying our foreign minister to the Havana summit of the non-aligned movement. And I stayed at the UN Plaza Hotel, which is next to the UN building. And I have lived there long enough to perhaps pay for the hotel itself. That many times I have stayed there. It's been very interesting, basically because it is a hub of activities during the General Assembly and also the accessibility to the UN. It has been very interesting. Now it has changed a lot, but still it retains that association with the UN. It's almost inseparable from the United Nations itself.
I was with you when you first went to Oxford. Went to for Oxford, but you also first went to Stratford-upon-Avon because you were so interested in Shakespeare. You felt excited. I remember that. What is the feeling when you first saw the UN and New York and all of that?
Well, these are two different phases in my life. Shakespeare was part of my life throughout my academic career. I had a fascination for it. I have taught it, I have learned it, I have used it for my civil service examination, I have acted in it. So Shakespeare was very much a part of my life, and I was dreaming of the day when I would be on Stratford-upon-Avon. And that we did with family on my first visit outside towards United States, and stopped in Europe, in London, and then visited Stratford-upon-Avon. It was an emotional experience more than anything else.
And seeing the UN and New York?
Well, UN, of course, has been a dream. It's very difficult to get a posting to New York. You have to be recognized as someone with certain abilities. And I'm glad I was selected to visit the UN, to work at the UN as a junior diplomat, and later as ambassador and deputy permanent representative. And then in Vienna as the ambassador to various UN organizations, in Nairobi too. And in Geneva, I worked regularly at the disarmament work and human rights work. And so all these four capitals are very dear to me and very encouraging and very inspiring.
Many years later, many decades after your trip to Stratford and taking me to Stratford, I got to work with the Royal Shakespeare Company and the Birthplace Trust. All of that was because of your inspiration. You named your book, your autobiography, with a very special title.
Words, words, words. And this is a quote from Hamlet. When Polonius is probably ask Hamlet, what do you read, my lord? He says words, words, words. He didn't say a book or a document or anything else. Because words constitute the substance of language, communication, and everything. And in diplomacy, words are most important. Spoken words, written words, and unspoken words. And long before I joined the Foreign Service, I felt that if I ever wrote a book, I would title it like that. But when the publisher had problems, he said they would think that it's a book on phonetics or something. So he added the title Adventures in Diplomacy to clarify this.
And it's the first of your 12 books.
Yes.
All right, next question. What led you to host a TV show on international relations in Malayalam?
That was by sheer accident. Several things I did accidentally after retiring from the service. My only idea was to start a civil service academy in Trivandrum. There was only one at that time, which was the Government Academy. So the Nair Service Society invited me because they had the same idea to start the Civil Service Academy, and I ran it for about 17 years. And that was very interesting because we saw how the examination has evolved, how people are preparing for it, and I was able to contribute to the creation of at least 100 civil servants in different services over the years.
Wonderful. And so, how did that lead to the TV show, and the TV show led to your work?
Well, the TV show was, as I said, another accident because Dr. Reggie Menon, who had met me in different places, was the first visitor to my home when I reached Trivandrum, asking me to just take over the Asianet as a CEO or a managing director. That is what I had in mind. He said, I wanted a face to represent Asianet News in US because of your international experience. But that didn't work out because of problems of various kinds. And therefore he suggested the starting of a program. And so I started what's called Videsha Vicharam, which means program on international affairs. And that went on for some time, for some years. And then came COVID, and I discontinued it for a while because I didn't go to the studios. But at that time, I started my own YouTube channel, which was called Tea with TPS. And that was a one-man show, but it was well received. A lot of people were interested in appearing on it, and they contributed, and that remained. And after that, when the situation got normal, I went back to the Asianet at their invitation. Manoj Das, who was the CEO at that time, was very keen that I should get back. And then among the very many suggestions of a title, which we thought should be different, and then came the Around and Aside, a title suggested by Mr. Manoj Das, who is now the editor of Mathrubhumi.
And you did that you've done altogether these TV shows almost every week for more than 20 years, 22 years, right, almost, and more than 1,000 episodes, obviously, over that time.
And all the other shows I do at the invitation of various channels. Kerala has many channels, and anything that happens anywhere in the world, something which I might not have even heard of while I was sleeping, they would ask me questions. When I say I have to follow, they'll say, no, we'll tell you what happened, but react. So,
and that's just the Malayalam ones. You also do North Indian ones,
yes,
and Tamil, and all of
even
that.
Even Arnab put me on the screen for some time.
Well, he yelled at you, basically, like he does everybody else. All right, you've also been involved in education policy in Kerala. Why?
That was because I was offered, again, surprisingly, by the Chief Minister, Mr. Oman Chandi, to become the Vice Chairman of the State Higher Education Council, which is a policy-making body. In fact, the qualification says preferably a former Vice Chancellor. So there are lots of Vice Chancellors that lined up. But the Chief Minister invited me to do it, and I asked him why, because I didn't have much education experience except teaching in Marivanus College for 1 year. He said, no, I'm not looking for education experience that we have. But what I need is a person who has seen the world and how education works around the world. Because as Chief Minister, I'm being asked by many people as to why we are sticking to an old pattern of education. Why aren't we liberalizing it? Why aren't we improving it, etc.? And then he said, I thought you who had seen the world, particularly the universities in the United States and others, you may have some ideas to reform education. And I found it very fascinating, and worked on it together with some number of colleagues who were also vice chancellors. And I had also the title of, or the status of vice chancellor as the vice chairman of the Higher Education Council. And we prepared a program, and several proposals, against 16 reports were submitted to the government. Some of them are implemented. Some of the difficult ones still remain pending.
You had a crisis with one of them, so talk about that. And ironically, that's now become the policy of the country, of the state, even though there was opposition to it.
Yes, I think it was a deliberate effort to stop the reform process altogether. So it has nothing to do with whatever new things I did. They're all nothing new in that sense. But they caught on this idea of private universities. India has private universities in all the states. Kerala is the only state which does not have a private university. And again, by accident, the Amity University had asked me to go to Trivandrum to explore setting up of a private university there. Then I found that was a hard task because you need to have legislation. And Amity itself gave up. And Mr. Omanjandi knew that I had made this attempt, so he thought that this would be an opportunity. And then we established an experts committee, the former vice chancellor, and worked on it and provided a report to the government, which we thought were practical. But it was seen as an ideological issue by the left opposition at that time. And they started a campaign saying that I have come from the US, I'm representing international views. This will go against Kerala's interest, the kind of propaganda. And that built up because some of the former vice chancellors who were surprised that I was doing this also started criticizing it. They issued even a statement. 9 vice chancellors issued a statement that this particular reform, the proposal that we had made, will destroy Kerala's basic, Kerala education's basic character. It will have many international influence. It is commercializing and commoditizing education, forgetting the fact that United Nations itself has recognized education as a business proposition, which is desirable. Anyway, so it built up so much that when I called an international conference of experts, which concluded 30 vice chancellor level people from the United States at a meeting called a conference on global education conference. And at the time of the inaugural, when I went to the Villa Hotel to begin the procedure, I was stopped at the entrance by a number of students or others, about 200 of them, and they stopped me from going into the hotel, and then a little bit of violence also took place. And
you were pushed to the ground and hit?
Yes, I fell down. But I got up and I was not hurt in any way, so I didn't feel any discomfort after that. So I was able to go and start the conference within about half an hour of this incident, in the same suit that I was wearing. But all over the country, my picture appeared in a proper business suit lying on the on the beach of Kovalam. On the beach of Kovalam, people go in a different costume. So this created a great impact that an effort for reforming education has met with this kind of fate. But interestingly, 10 years later, 15 years later in fact, when the opposition came to power, one of the things they recognized and started introducing was the same draft which I used with, of course, certain amendments. And it was adopted by the assembly, and the opposition stuck to it, but at the same time there were some difficulties, some technical difficulties, which I'm not aware of. It was passed by the assembly, but the governor has not signed it as yet. I do not know why.
And since then there's been a change anyway of
So
government.
now the new government has come, and their main motto is reform of education and bringing foreign universities, the best universities in the world, to Kerala. That was something that was in the offing as a Government of India project. But now they are working on that, and the Chief Minister has already spoken to me as to how we should go about it.
So here, the next question is about writing books. So this is only some of your books. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 out of your 12 plus books you have, right? So
Yeah.
what does it feel like when you hold it in your hands?
It's a heavy weight which I had to carry for a long time. But I enjoyed it because each one of these was a subject which was close to my heart. And the writing was never a burden. It was always a pleasure. In fact, most of these were written while traveling in the trains and the planes and other modes of transport. And so the pressure was not too much. And also it was inspired by different people, some publishers, some students of mine, some academicians, and so on. So it is basically a record of what I have done during my 37 years in the Foreign Service as well as 20 years outside it.
What would you recommend, or would you recommend a civil service career to a college student today?
Yes,
Why?
I absolutely do that. I talk about it. It's become much more common now than when I started. But now there are 28 civil service academies, institutes in Trivandrum competing with each other, and some of them my students who did not make it to the service. And they have given a new phase, a new approach. Of course, basically more and more technology and more online education. And that has created a good, what shall we say, ecosystem for civil service training in Kerala. And that was basically ignited by the NSS Academy, which worked very well for about 20 years. So Kerala has become somewhat of a hub for civil service, and people have started coming to Kerala for it. So it's a well-established thing now, and almost every good student aspires to it. But of course, it's a very difficult examination now, particularly the prelims are very tough because it eliminates a large number of people, and that's a disappointment to many. And then there is a lot of unpredictability of that examination. But still, this year, 57th rank was secured by a girl, Kerala. Normally, Kerala has much higher positions in the top part, but she insisted on joining the Foreign Service, and she is now joining the Foreign Service. She is from a very, shall we say, a poor family, but she was able to pursue her interest and insisted on keeping the Foreign Service, even after the temptation of joining the IAS in the State Cadre. That's an attraction for some people, but she even resisted that. And I'm glad to say she was my student for some time, and I'm happy that I inspired her.
At a time when India is so much about business, commercial stuff, power, all of that, how do you justify going into the civil service when people can make much more money outside the civil service?
But at the time I joined, there was no such option. I had only two options: either to be a teacher in a university or college, or join the government service at a lower level. So the most desirable thing for anyone was at that time joining the civil service, particularly the Foreign Service. And therefore I chose English literature, which I thought was helpful for my own preparation. And in the first chance itself, I got a fairly high rank to qualify for the Foreign Service. And that was a great achievement as far as I'm concerned, from the background I have come and the kind of education I had. To be in the top service, which is contested by scholars from Oxford and Cambridge, it was a great attraction. But the technological revolution had not taken place. We had not seen any money of any kind in Kerala out of that. And so that was not an option. But now, even with all those options, because of the attraction of the civil service, and many people, even after having done IITs and so on, compete because they find glamour in running the government or representing India abroad, rather than make millions through technological services.
That's great. Okay, next few questions we'll do faster questions, faster answers. you must have been among the top of the candidates who took the civil service exam at your time. What year? And would you have worked for the IAS or IPS? Why or why not?
No, well, you give options. I gave IFS as my first option. Second was IAS and third was IPS. But the UPSC board seemed to, at least appeared to favor my joining the IPS, not the Foreign Service. All the questions were on IPS, why I did not opt for it as the first option, etc. But that was easy to say because I talked about my interest in international relations, etc. So that was just, their usual way of fooling people around. So they ask questions. You think that you have been selected for the IPS, and that kind of feeling they created. But that didn't matter. And since I got the first choice, I joined. I was the 6th in the Foreign Service at that time, out of the 13. And it was very exciting every moment from then onwards.
All right. Our next question is, most who are selected for the IFS, IAS in the 1960s, 70s were students of economics, political science, or history. You have an MA and a BA in English literature. Did it help or hurt your chances at the exam?
No, it helped. Where you did not know the facts, you could fictionalize it. And that was a very great advantage of learning Shakespeare and other English literature. And that also enables you, because after all, this examination is a test of your English knowledge. After all these centuries of, years of independence, English is still the dominant language for these kind of things. And therefore, having a thorough knowledge of the English language and also style of writing, that certainly helped. And even in the service itself, I have found anytime my dispatches are appreciated for the literary quality of those dispatches.
All right. Our next question is, you speak Japanese and Russian. What makes you good at learning languages?
Well, it's not out of choice, in the sense that the Foreign Service, you need to learn one language, which is called compulsory, and that is allotted to you. And that time when I joined, Japan was the most prominent country in the world. Japan had become a manufacturing hub, and everything was, movies were on Japan and so on. So I gave Japanese as my first preference. Many others gave Chinese or French or Spanish, etc. The disadvantage of Japanese was a one country language. Japanese is not spoken anywhere else. If you have French or Spanish or Russian, you can use it in several countries. That was a disadvantage. Therefore, I was not posted back to Japan for various reasons, because it's always a jigsaw puzzle. But I was sent several times to Japan to interpret for prime ministers and various other organizations. And since I moved away to multilateral diplomacy, then it was more UN postings rather than Japan I got. So that's a disappointment that I didn't go back to work in Japan to use the Japanese language in which I had earned distinction.
The Tokyo home of the Indian ambassador must be a very special place.
Yes, it's now even more special than before. It is a vast area, an old house, but very prestigious. But the one thing that we gained after the Second World War was the war reparations that India got. And most of these reparations were land and buildings. Although the buildings had become old, but the land was worth its weight in gold. You could just hand over a piece of land and somebody will build whatever you want on it free and give you use for it. And that is how. So sometimes they say that if we had sold all the properties that we got, we could have cleared all our foreign debt. But we didn't do such short-sighted things. And now we have very good accommodation for the officers, ambassador, deputy chief of mission. And these are key places in the center of Tokyo. And that's a great pride, and India occupies this very important, landlord in the busy city where land is worth its weight in gold.
Would you have liked to, is that a disappointment you have that you didn't get posted back as ambassador there?
Yes, it was, but then I had moved into multilateral diplomacy and considered an expert, so they wouldn't consider me for Japan, they would consider me for Vienna, New York and Geneva, and I did New York twice, and Vienna and Nairobi, and Geneva as a regular visitor.
Do you remember how you prepared for the exam?
Yes. At that time there was no particular guidance, there were no academies or anything. And And so most of it was done by looking at old question papers, talking to people. But there was some kind of a tradition in the university college where I studied. Whoever stood first in the English MA always got into the service. So that was some kind of a magic. So when I got into first rank in masters in English, everybody presumed that I had joined the service. So it was that kind of a natural move. But preparation was, of course, very hard, in the sense that apart from English literature, you had to do British history and Indian history as optional subjects. Now there's only one optional subject. And I did rather poorly in the last paper on Indian history, because I did the Indian history at a very superfluous level, and that was not enough. But that put me down, in a sense. I would have been probably the first if I did not do the second optional paper so badly that I thought of even walking out of the room. But somehow it worked out, particularly because I got a fairly high rank in what is called the personality test or interview, about 86%, probably the highest that year.
And the rest, as they say, is history or English literature, not history is what you did. All right, last couple of questions. Who were your mentors in college and in your career? What did you learn from them? And you can name, this is what we call name dropping. So drop some names or give shout outs, as they say.
Well, the university college was perhaps the best source for English studies, certainly. Starting from G. Kumarapillai to Ayyappa Panikar to Hridaya Kumari. These are all not just names, they are all part of my life, as it were. It was 5 years I spent with them, and each of them was inspiring and very encouraging. So my dream in life was to speak English like Hridaya Kumari. She was so fluent. At the same time, Dr. Ayyappa Panikar, whom we thought did not know much English, because the way he spoke very briefly, with intervals to make us understand. And now realize that we did not understand him at all. He was probably the most scholarly, most creative, his most outstanding poet in Malayalam literature, of all things. He is the new Malayalam poetry originated by him. So he was the most inspiring for. But there were others. All teachers were very, very good and took interest in everyone, particularly me, because I had stood first in MA and BA in English literature in that same college.
That's amazing. All right, last couple of things. A couple of mentors in the service. You mentioned mentors in education, but over the years, who are some of your bosses who you'd like to say hi to, if they were still with us? Some may have moved on, passed on, of course.
My first real boss was Ambassador Asrani, who was number 2 man in Tokyo. We had an ambassador, but it was the DCM's job to train the new officers. And it really took charge of me, as it were, as a member of the family. And he is the first boss I remember, and naturally the first boss I had, in a sense. And the ambassador was basically a guide in a certain sense. But he was certainly very significant in my early career. Then I went to Bhutan, where I had Ambassador Gokhale, a very decent gentleman, very capable, very influential in the service, and very charming. And Bhutan was a challenge, because it's a challenge to our diplomacy that we are in a country which has a treaty relationship with us, but at the same time a member of the United Nations. So this is the kind of thing that we had to do. Of course, after later I had worked with very important ambassadors, like Gujarat in Moscow, who became a mentor for me, afterwards arranging a school admission for my children, because he had so much influence in Delhi. And he gave me a lot of importance in terms of administration and political work in Moscow. Then, of course, I moved on to becoming a head of mission myself. And then, of course, support came from Delhi. The TPS Menon was there. Ambassador Venkateswaran was a great influence. He sent me to Fiji just because he was in Fiji and he had enjoyed it. I was on my way to Oman. I packed my bags. And he said, "Why do you go to Oman? There's nothing to do there." And so he sent me to Fiji, and that became prophetic. I had a lot to do in Fiji. I was expelled from Fiji for standing up for the community, and under Rajiv Gandhi's guidance, and it was all very exciting.
Excellent. And you've been a mentor to so many people. What common issue have you encountered when you were a mentor, or what is your advice to younger people in their careers, if they're, no matter what industry they're in? What are some of the bedrock principles that will last and work in any career as a mentor that you would give?
No, as I said earlier, English language is crucial. Everything that you do, you may be in other countries, but still you do work with translation, etc. You speak in English most of the time, and so on. So the first advice I give them is to master English, spoken and written, and that is the key, essentially. Then the next is just read newspapers. I had nothing to read till I came to University College except the Hindu newspaper, which used to come to my village in the evening, and I read it from page to all the pages of the Hindu at my father's direction, and that was really the education I got. And this I advise them even today. Hindu is oriented towards civil service competition. Now I write for the Hindu. They always choose things which are useful for the foreign service and the civil service examination. So master your English language and read newspapers. This is the first advice I give to those who come to start their training program with me.
Couple of other things in terms of working with people and how to interact with them and how to adjust to strange situations. You were thrown into so many strange situations in 37 years. You just moved around.
Yes, that's a challenge. And the very fact that after 37 years you are able to stand erect and speak, that is a success. Because there are so many challenges, physical, mental, financial, all kinds of things you go through. And finally you come out, and there have been several casualties in the foreign service. We say that the casualty rate in the foreign service is next only the armed forces, because the kind of new surroundings you go in, you forget yourself, the temptations are too many, and unless you have a very strong character, it is very difficult to resist all kinds of temptations where you're abroad.
And the stress is so high, right? That's part of it.
And alcohol is a big issue.
And you're paid to
Drink.
serve it and give it and all of that. So temptation is always a problem. So last thing, we talked about all the books you wrote. You also helped produce many books, but I want you to talk about this book and how this happened and what it's all about.
This is my wife's memoirs, in a sense, but I assisted her in various ways, and we worked together in many ways, but basically her own work. In fact, the last 2 years of her life she dedicated to this book. All the time, sleeping and walking around, she thought about this book and put a lot of work into this. I helped her in drafting things, but it's basically her own book which came out of her heart. She could not complete it. She would have written a much bigger book. But soon after her passing away, I had many free evenings when I sat down and completed it. And as her wish, it was released by the governor of Kerala. And that also we accomplished in her absence. But it's widely read, and in fact a new genre of books has arisen in the foreign service now. Most wives are writing about their own career, because wives play a very significant role in a diplomat's life. And many people don't know what they do. And that's why my wife called it the better half of diplomacy, and I agree, because their challenges are much more without any training than we who have spent several years of our life training hard.
Thank you. That's the end of the questions. Anything else you'd like to say?
No, I would say that I'm very happy, and if I have another opportunity in my life to choose a service, I'll join the foreign service.